Pwalpar here. You're about to watch part 4 of my story that I created about how I got a railroad job. But I'm going to make a short clip here first of my actual face because I made a AI clone. It's hard to tell me from it. I'm going to put them side by side to see if we can tell the difference. And then we'll start right off with the video, part 4. I want to say that I did put a lot of work. I put several days' work into this in the process of learning the AI procedure, artificial intelligence. So I don't think I'm going to do a whole lot of these. I've got several hours of work into this type of video, but you're going to see a lot of CapCut AI in today's story. And without dragging it out, we'll get right on to it. I appreciate your comments, and let's see how it goes.
Good day, Pwalpar viewers. I am Walter Avatar Clone. Walter is testing if I function for the very first time. Good day, Pwalpar viewers. I am Walter Avatar Clone. Walter is testing if I function for the very first time.
That was my AI voice. This is my actual voice. I doubt I will use the Walter clone very much. It was fun making it, however. Let's get on with part 4, my friends. Most of today's part 4 will be done with another type of avatar. I'm still learning this.
The next day, my mother wanted to show me around the mountains, but I concluded it was time to go get a driver's license. She rode along with me, but had no intentions of getting a license. I went into the troopers' barracks, there in Blue Ridge, Georgia. I took their written test, and passed it by the skin of my teeth. I should have failed, but am a good guesser at multiple choice tests, and I got lucky with a few wild guesses. They said, go outside and take your driving test when the trooper returns from whomever he's testing. Soon the trooper returned and got out of that car, telling the young lady, who was somewhat rattled, that she was welcome to come try the test again tomorrow, if she wanted to. I concluded she had failed the test, and assumed it must be a humdinger of a driving test. When the officer turned and took the paperwork from my hands, he looked up at me. You guessed it already. It was the same trooper who my friendly waves. Let me see your learner's permit, he said. Oh, I don't have one, I replied. Maybe he declined to pursue the questions he had, because of my quick rundown about just returned from the Navy, and about how I once had a Florida license, but we walked to my car, and he got in after Helen got out to wait for me. I thought, Lord, don't let him ask to see her license. He spoke politely to her, and off we went. The test was a real doozy, too. I made 2 left turns, 1 right turn, and stopped at 1 red light in town. We went around the block, and was back at the station. Heck, I could have passed that test back when I was 12 and driving my brother David's car around in the backyard. I recall, I did have a few problems in the backyard. I seem to remember running into a telephone pole. That wasn't too much trouble to get out of because I just blamed it on the rain and the wet grass. It was, however, hard to explain to my father was all the donuts dug up in the backyard grass, and why the telephone pole now had a distinctive 30-degree tilt to it. That evening, my father returned home. We were sitting and watching TV that evening after eating a big supper, when my father asked me what I was going to do about getting a job. I told him it had been a long time since I had a vacation, and that I planned to just visit with them a couple of weeks. Then I would go get a job. I just need a little vacation from work for a while, and besides, I have a few bucks saved to tide me over for a while, I said. I assumed he was cool with that idea, and it seemed like a reasonable thing to me. It was just good to be home for a change, instead of gallivanting all over the world. If you have ever been without any immediate family for 4 years, you might understand the need just to be around family for a change. For the first time in weeks, I had made it through the whole days without being worried about my future for a change, but he had just spoiled that for me. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of bacon frying, coffee brewing, and biscuits in the oven. I hit the deck, and got dressed. After shaving and getting cleaned up, I walked into the kitchen. "Sure smells good in here," I said. My father was sitting at the dining room table and had the newspaper open and reading it. If I had looked a little closer, I would have noticed he was thumbing through the want ads. I sat down as the food was being placed on the table. We had a nice breakfast. It was nice to eat some eggs without occasionally biting down on eggshells some ship's cook hadn't prepared properly, and drink some coffee that didn't taste like it was made with water dipped out of the ship's engine room bilges. After we finished eating, I complimented my mother on making such a good breakfast. I headed through to the living room. My father was already out there and was sitting in a rocking chair with the Atlanta Constitution paper flipped open to the want ads. This time, I got the drift of what was on his mind. Whether it was the fact he was truly concerned about my future or the fact he was afraid I was home to be a loafer for the rest of my life, I don't know. I was, however, feeling like I had about worn out my welcome. I was passing where he sat when he said, "When you gonna get a job, son?" I kind of lost it briefly. "This was sure a short vacation," I said. But it fell on deaf ears. "Here's a job," he was saying, while looking at some menial job offer that I would have never considered. Looking over his shoulder at the want ads, I saw one large ad that covered at least a third of the page. I wasn't even close enough to see what the words were, but I reached over his shoulder and pointed my finger at the big ad and said, "Hell, I'll go to work for those people right there." What?" he asked as he took another look at the paper and at the ad he had overlooked all morning. He began to read it aloud. It said something to the effect of Southern Railway now accepting applications for switchmen, trainmen, brakemen, and railcar repairmen. Note: railcar repairman requires knowledge and experience in welding, blueprints, metal fabrication, and requires a high mechanical aptitude. "I will apply for the railcar repairman job," I interrupted. At that point in the ad he stopped and said, "You can't get a railroad job. It says welding, and all these other requirements." I had already received a lot of info before I left the Navy about the possibility of working at a fire department, because in the last 4 years I had specialized in firefighting and had taken every test and school the Navy had to offer on the subject and had in fact excelled in it and had achieved the rank of E5 studying it. I just wasn't sure firemen were paid enough. Now I was, on a whim, actually ignoring all my training and going to actually consider applying for some job I never heard of before. I thought to myself, all that training, and in a fit of anger, am picking a job by wildly pointing my finger at an ad in a newspaper. The ad did, however, have its appeal to me. "Why can't I work for them?" I said. "What do you think I was learning when I took 3 years of machine shop in high school? If there is one thing Mr. Frank Lewis had taught me in those 3 years of teaching me, it was welding, blueprints, and metal fabrication. I don't know how to get to Atlanta from here, but if you will point me in the right direction, I will find it," I said. I thought to myself, he's still manipulating me, and I just fell for it hook, line, and sinker. He has just ended my vacation and in 5 minutes has me off looking for a job, just like he wanted to. "Point you the right direction," he said. "Hell, I will take you there." The next morning around 9 a.m., we arrived at the Southern Railway office building at 125 Spring Street, and my father pulled up to the curb and parked right in front of the main doors. I looked up at the large gray building and told him, "The sign here says no parking." "I doubt you will be here long," he said. "I will wait for you right here." It was obvious to me he had no confidence in my chance of getting a job there. I thought, well, there's a positive attitude, if ever I've seen one. I exited the car and entered the building, and was directed by the nurse at the nurse's station to go down the hall to the last door on the left, which I promptly did. On entering the large room, I saw around 20 or so men sitting there waiting at 2 long tables. There were some signs, one table for trainmen, switchmen, and brakemen, and the other table had a sign for railcar repairmen. I pulled up a chair and sat at the end of the appropriate table. Half of the men there to apply for jobs were sitting at both tables. I thought, well, chances of getting a job now are much slimmer than I had expected. I sure never expected to see this many folks looking for a job. There were two doors at the end of the room that were passageways from one side to the other, obviously, leading to other offices. A man entered through one of the doors and said, "May I have your attention? Today we are only accepting applications for trainmen, brakemen and switchmen." He then exited through the other door. He wasn't out of the room good before there was a scurry of chairs sliding back, and men suddenly deciding they wanted to sit at the other table. I was now sitting alone at the end of a 10-foot-long table, with lots of elbow room, and there were perhaps 19 men trying to squeeze up to the other 10-foot table, which was suitable for maybe half that many folks. I sniffed my armpit, wondering if I had a bad case of body odor or something. A short while later, two more men entered the room from the same door the other man had exited. One was telling all the men at the other table to get up and follow him, and as they all exited through the same door everyone else had. The other man approached me as I sat thinking, "There goes the ones most likely to get a job." He asked, "What are you here for?" I held up the section of newspaper in my hand and said, "I'm here to apply for a railcar repairman job." He tried to tell me something about not hiring them now, but I interrupted him by telling him, "You're at specifically states ... double quotes." He interrupted me and said, "Have you ever been arrested?" I started to say, shouldn't the proper term be, "Have I ever been convicted of a crime?" But I just replied, "Nope." He said, You wait right here," and he left the room. Sitting there alone in that huge room, I began to develop a complex, so I once again sniffed my armpit. Surely, I don't smell that bad, boy. In a few minutes the man returned, with a stack of papers. He set them in front of me, handed me a box of pencils, and said, "Fill out these papers regarding qualification and job history, and then take this mechanical aptitude test," and again quickly left the room. I debated with myself as to whether my armpit needed a rest sniff, but decided that this was just their short and to-the-point way of conducting interviews. Filling out the few pages regarding job history and stuff took a little while to do, but the fairly thick mechanical aptitude test was a breeze, and I finished it in under an hour. In a little while the man returned and collected my papers and casually thumbed through them. I presumed it was to determine if the application went from this point to further up the chain of command, or to some wastebasket somewhere. "Follow me, Mr. Parks," he said. I recall thinking, these sure are some talkative folks around here, as I followed him down a hallway. I sat outside an office for a while in a wooden chair. I waited to see if someone around there carried on conversations that consisted of sentences longer than 3 syllables, or if I was gonna be shown the front door. After a short wait, I was escorted into an office where I met a man in a white shirt and tie sitting behind a big desk. I shook his hand and sat in his interview chair. He said, "I have your application here and the results of the tests you took." I sat on the edge of my seat waiting. He paused a minute or two as if in deep thought, and said, "You have great qualifications, and you're just what we are looking for. The last Carman school started over a week ago, but I think from looking at your results here that you are a very smart man and will have no trouble catching up. I am going to push your application straight through, but you're gonna have to get all the medical stuff done right away. So you're gonna be busy the rest of the day attending to it all. Get it all done, and you will start school Monday morning. Welcome aboard," he said. "Take these papers down to the nurse's station, and you will be directed where to go from there." I shook his hand, and had crossed the room, and had my hand on his doorknob, when it registered in my brain, like a bell going off. "Money," I thought. "We haven't talked money," I thought. I turned and faced him saying, "Just one thing?" I asked. "Yes, Mr. Parks," he said. "How much will I be making?" He glanced down at his papers as if he didn't already know, and said the job pays $3.49 an hour. "Thanks," I replied, and as I turned the doorknob to leave the room my brain was going. Somehow, I managed to get out of the room without shouting, "Hot dang," I was thinking. while I'm gonna be rolling in dough. Now that's considerably more than any fireman job would pay me. A considerable load of worrying had just gotten a lot lighter. A short trip to the nurse's station followed, where I filled out a ton of forms. I was directed to go from there to a Dr. Rice's office on Peachtree Street for a physical exam. I probably could end this story here, but no story about this subject would be complete without mentioning a certain old company doctor.